As soon as a mountain is formed, it begins to crumble and wash to the sea. Now, it doesn't become apparent right away, but if we watch over the course of time, we're going to find out that many mountains that used to exist are now making up the ocean seafloor. And relationships are similar. In a way, as soon as we form a new friendship, outside forces and inside forces begin an erosion that tears people apart. And the way that many deal with it today is they just get a new friend. In fact, it's so much easier to just swipe to the side and find a new relationship than it is to do the work to repair the old friendship or to maintain the friendship. But when it comes to maintenance, just think about the fact that there are cars on the road that have been being driven for 90 years, and there are other cars that are in the junk pile in 15 years. What would you say is the difference between a car that lasts 90 years and a car that lasts 15 years? Probably it is maintenance. So in the same way that we can make a car last longer by maintaining it, you and I can make our marriages, our friendships, and our partnerships last longer by employing maintenance. So what are some things that will maintain relationships? In view of the heartache associated with breakups, it's well worth it to do a little bit of work up front and during the relationship to make it last. So we're going to look at 3 things that we can do, and here they are: micro adjustments, firm boundaries, and reinvention. So let's start with micro adjustments. What is a micro adjustment? Well, imagine a young man balancing a stick on the palm of his hand. Now, he's not using his other hand to help support it. He's just simply balancing it using his flat palm. What does he need to do in order to keep it balanced? Well, he needs to make a lot of little subtle adjustments. When it starts to fall a certain direction, he needs to get back under it again. Now, he could neglect it for a little bit, but then it would take heroic measures to get back underneath the stick to get it balanced again. And for the sake of our illustration, it's much better to not have to do heroics. We don't want to have to do something drastic to save a friendship or a relationship. If it's necessary, then yes, do it. But what if we could just eliminate the need for heroic measures by doing something steady and constant? And the fact is, that is possible. You and I can micro-adjust, and we can tune in order to keep the relationship going. In order to do it, though, we've got to have a vision of what success really means. It's not as simple as just balancing a stick on your hand, because people are complex. But what we want to do is think about peace in the relationship. And we want to define peace this way, not as the absence of war, but as a state of bliss or positivity. When countries are fighting with each other and they call a ceasefire, sometimes they say, oh, we have peace. But is there really peace between the two former enemies? Usually not. See, there might be a lack of conflict, but that's very different from really getting along. The same thing is true with our relationships. Just having a standoff or a stalemate, no longer fighting with each other, that's not what we want. That's not the kind of bliss that we're shooting for. So making minor adjustments means being tuned in on the other person. Help the other person to continue to feel special, valued. And it's a lot easier to do it first. At first, we just pay attention to somebody and they kind of feel happy. They're validated. We're giving them some of our attention. But as time goes by, what you did to get there is not enough to keep you there. We've got to continue to find ways to make people feel that they are valued. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to be constantly attending to somebody. In fact, we talk about high maintenance people that you can never leave alone. And that's not what we're talking about here. So it's more a case of us just asking the question, am I at peace with so-and-so? Are we good? And if the answer is even slightly no, that things are strained, and if that relationship is important to you, then do what you can do to restore the balance as quickly as possible. Now, with regard to micro adjustments, there's a small thing you can do with a weed in your backyard, but if you don't do it and it grows into a giant tree, then you have to get a chainsaw or hire somebody. So the micro adjustment, when it comes to things like resentment and bad feelings, is to handle them while they're small. Don't wait until they become big trees. or till you need professional help to save it. And just imagine pulling out a little weed with your 2 fingers because it's small enough that you can do that. That's a micro adjustment. Another illustration, maybe even more relevant to maintaining a good friendship, is take out the trash. Just imagine a young man he gets his first apartment, and he's never been really good at taking care of his chores, but at least at home somebody else made sure that things got done. So imagine that he goes to the fast food restaurant, brings home some food and eats most of it, but then leaves the balance, the leftovers, in the corner of the kitchen counter. And the next day, he comes and does the same thing. Doesn't take out the old trash, but he adds to it day by day by day. Well, the day is going to come when things smell pretty bad and there's a lot of flies circling around. He won't be able to have people over. In fact, if we imagine an extreme case, he may even not be able to live in the apartment anymore after a certain amount of time if he doesn't do the maintenance. He doesn't take out the trash. And that's the way many people live their lives. They don't do the little things. They don't get over resentment or anger, hurt feelings. They don't do it in real time, and it stacks up. And pretty soon, they can't live there anymore. And our modern world has made it so easy to just swipe to the side and see a new face and start a new friendship. But what a horrible legacy to leave. Broken, broken, broken friendship after friendship after friendship. And remember, you can't get a new old friend. We can get a new friend, yes, and maybe we can keep them for a while, but what if we could keep our old friends too and keep those relationships healthy? So that's point number 1, be willing to make those little adjustments as soon as possible. Second point is firm boundaries. Now, it might seem like a contradiction here. We're talking about keeping the peace, but now we're talking about setting limits or boundaries. But I read recently that if you're afraid to set a boundary with someone, there's a possibility that that isn't a relationship that's really healthy. You see, healthy relationships, people actually appreciate knowing where they stand. They want to know how they can be a good friend to you. And so telling somebody, don't tease me in public, please. Or don't make up stories about me or you. Don't talk behind my back. You see, that's not mean. That's letting somebody know where you stand, letting them know how they can please you. And they say good fences make good neighbors. So what you're doing is you're building good fences. You're helping to maintain your relationship because people know where the boundary is. Now, firm boundaries are important because people are always testing to see how resolute other people are. And so just imagine an illustration. If you're a camper or backpacker, you may be familiar with putting a bear bag up in a tree. And what do they tell you if you're going to put your food up in the tree? They say, get a tree that's sturdy, because you don't want it to be one that a bear can push over. And here's what happens. A bear that's been around for a little while learns that when it smells food up there in that tree, that if it could go over there and just push on the trunk a little bit, if the tree yields at all, the bear will put all his might into breaking it. And the next thing you know, he's got his food sack. But on the other hand, if that tree does not even flex a little bit, the bear just moves on. And in a similar way, if people test your boundaries and they find out that you really haven't set firm boundaries, that it's all negotiable, they probably will walk over your boundaries. They'll take advantage of you. And that's not recommended. That's not a good example, but it's a reality. So set boundaries, be clear about them, and then be resolute, be firm. Don't tempt somebody to want to push you. Now let's talk about reinvention. So relationships don't have to be stagnant. They can be dynamic and active, and the healthiest ones are. And just to get our minds around this, let's think about the natural progression of life, sometimes called the curve of life. And what happens is when a child is born, things go from very secure and healthy and warm to being born. They come out naked, cold, and wet, and as it's been said, things just get worse from there. However, with a healthy child, they survive the birth process. And even though things got worse for a little bit, there's a curve where things begin to go back and to go up again. And that period of vertical growth can last for years. as that baby turns the corner from being dependent and helpless to being stronger and stronger every single day. Now, as the curve of life progresses, though, eventually an individual will plateau. The plateau can go on for an extended period of time, but finally, often people go ahead and go into a decline. Now, relationships have a similar life cycle if we're not careful. They start out with a little bit of difficulty, although usually we're not tuned in on it because it's so exciting, making a new friend. But there is difficulty because we're finding out where we stand and who they really are, and they're discovering who we are. And so that relationship does take a little bit of a negative turn. It has to turn the corner and begin to thrive. But eventually, a healthy relationship, friendship, marriage, partnership, begins that vertical ascent. And then as things begin to go up, there's this extended period of vitality, health, and growth. And those are the good times. Now, for the sake of our illustration, let's look at how corporations manage to outlast their competitors. And in America, one of the main success stories has been the McDonald's Corporation. It started out with that same life curve. It began with the limitations of a small business, and it toughed it out. In fact, it made the corner and began to turn, and then eventually it started growing. But early on, there was the 15-cent hamburger. Now, just think about it. If McDonald's had never reinvented itself and had just continued selling 15-cent hamburgers, how long would the company have lasted? They wouldn't be in business today, or the hamburgers would be really small. But that's not what happened. You see, very quickly, while they were still in that vertical growth state, when things were healthy and fiscally sound, they brought something else to the marketplace. It was a reinvention. Maybe it was the French fries, maybe it was the milkshake, whatever they brought in next. It added to the momentum. And then even if that 15-cent hamburger drifted into oblivion, if it went over the plateau and went down, it didn't matter because the company had reinvented itself and was now going up with a new product. Eventually, the Big Mac came along, and the Big Mac was a period of growth. But they didn't wait until the Big Mac just plateaued and began to descend. They introduced the Quarter Pounder with cheese, the McRib, the McLean. They've just had a long series, and the corporation is still going strong today because they don't rest on the past. Now, how could we apply that to relationships? Well, maybe you have a friendship that's lasted a long time. Is it still based on exactly what brought you together in the first place? Is what you did to become friends enough to keep you in an active relationship? Chances are the answer is no, that you've had to reinvent. And it's definitely good advice going forward. Look for ways that you can form new connections before the relationship begins to turn the corner, plateau, and then descend. So what might that look like? Well, perhaps it's taking up a new hobby that you can do together, or maybe if it's a business, working at another product launch or a new service or something in addition to what you've been doing together before. Add it to what you're doing together now. And just like McDonald's, if you continue to do that before the relationship plateaus and reinvent, you will be able to continue to go vertically. Some successful entertainment acts have done exactly the same thing. You think about some of the longest running musical entertainment acts, and they're not playing the same music that they played 50 years ago. In fact, if you look at their catalog, you'll find that they reinvent, and then before that burns out too much, they reinvent, and they continue to entertain their audience going on into the future. So in conclusion, relationships are difficult. Maintenance is difficult. But breakups are difficult. It's like choose your hard. Do you want to do the hard thing of reinventing and maintaining your relationships, keeping it healthy with strong boundaries? Or do you want to go through the kind of hard that's associated with a broken heart? So let's just keep these thoughts in mind. Be willing to go ahead and continue to make the other person special by maintaining the peace that you had at first. Go ahead and tell them what's out of bounds, where your boundaries are, be firm about them. And then look for ways to continue to reinvent your relationships. And if you do, you will be able to drive that car for the next 100 years.